Let's start by addressing a truth most men either overlook or outright deny. Attraction doesn't hinge on grand gestures, wealth, or even appearance. The real pull, what ignites deep, almost irrational attraction in a woman, is far more subtle. It's psychological, and one of the most powerful psychological forces at play is a man's ability to lead without controlling, what I call subtle dominance. Now, before your mind jumps to toxic masculinity or coercive power, pause. This isn't about aggression. It's not about raising your voice or asserting your opinion at every opportunity. Subtle dominance is the quiet confidence of a man who knows who he is and makes no apologies for it. It's a kind of internal gravity, a calm, composed presence that draws people in without effort. That kind of energy doesn't just attract a woman. It pulls her in on a cellular level. You see, women are not instinctively attracted to chaos or men who need to be loud to be seen. They're drawn to men who can lead with clarity and purpose, not because they want to dominate her life, but because they can navigate their own life with composure. A woman becomes obsessed with a man who makes her feel secure without suffocating her, who can take initiative without robbing her agency, who holds space for her emotions without drowning in them. That balance isn't common, and that's exactly why it's magnetic. At the core of this is self-leadership. If you can't lead yourself, your reactions, your focus, your purpose, how can you expect her to trust your direction? It's a psychological equation playing out in her subconscious. She may not say it, but she's watching how you respond under pressure, how you handle silence, how you carry yourself when no one's watching. That's where obsession is born, not in your words, but in your presence. And make no mistake, presence is everything. You can be the most physically attractive man in the room, but if your energy is scattered, insecure, or reactive, she will not feel safe enough to fall. Not in the way that keeps her thinking about you days later. Not in the way that makes her feel like you've entered her psyche. Think about it. Every woman, consciously or not, is scanning for a man whose energy she can relax into. A man whose silence doesn't feel like punishment, whose decisions aren't dictated by insecurity. A man who doesn't need to prove he's alpha because his discipline, boundaries, and self-respect speak for him. That's subtle dominance, and it's rare, so how do you embody it? Start by slowing down, let your words breathe. People who rush their speech are often rushing to be validated. When you pause, you show that you're not afraid of space or silence. That's power. Learn to hold eye contact without overthinking it. Be still in your body, control your tone. These aren't tricks, they're habits of someone who is rooted in himself. That's the type of man who naturally leads, not by force, but by magnetism, and understand this, women are deeply intuitive. They can sense when a man's confidence is performative. If you're playing a role, it will eventually crack. You don't have to act dominant. You have to be grounded. That comes from doing the inner work. Facing your fears, understanding your emotional patterns, owning your mistakes. When a man takes full responsibility for his life, it changes the way he walks, talks, and even breathes. That transformation is what makes him unforgettable. Because obsession isn't about constant contact. It's not about texting her every hour or trying to manage her attention. It's about the impression you leave. When you walk away from a woman and she can still feel your presence, you've tapped into something real. And you didn't do it by manipulating her emotions. You did it by mastering your own. It's fascinating, really. The more in control you are of yourself, the less you need to control her, and paradoxically, the less you try to control, the more she gives. Freely, enthusiastically, she becomes obsessed not with your dominance, but with the safety and certainty your presence gives her. Now, let's bring this back to the bigger picture. We live in a time where many men are taught to chase validation, to say the right things, do the trendy things, show off the lifestyle. But women don't fall in love with the performance. They fall in love with the man behind the mask, the one who doesn't need to perform at all. The man who leads by example, not manipulation, who doesn't need to yell to be heard, who doesn't panic when things go quiet. And if you can become that man, if you can hold your power with elegance and restraint, you will find that women won't just be attracted to you. They'll become psychologically attached to the feeling you give them, a feeling of direction, of calm, of being anchored. So if you remember nothing else from this entire video, remember this. Let's go a little deeper now, because when it comes to creating emotional intensity between a man and a woman, most people misunderstand where that intensity actually comes from. They think it's about always being available, endlessly kind, or constantly entertaining. But human desire doesn't grow in monotony. Desire is born in contrast, and this is where one of the most misunderstood psychological forces comes into play, the emotional loop. You see, the brain becomes obsessed with what it can't fully predict. It craves patterns, but paradoxically, it also craves disruption within those patterns. That's what creates emotional texture. When someone makes us feel a spectrum of emotion, joy, uncertainty, excitement, longing, we don't just remember them, we become psychologically attached to them. And that's the key. You don't want to be liked. You want to be emotionally engraved in her mind. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about understanding how emotional memory works. Think about the people you've been most drawn to in your life. Were they always perfectly stable, completely predictable, and constantly available? No. What made them unforgettable was the way they challenged your emotional rhythm, sometimes making you feel secure and other times leaving you questioning. That unpredictability didn't make you distrust them. It made you engage. It pulled you in. That's the loop. So how do you create this emotional loop without being toxic or dishonest? It starts with being emotionally intelligent enough to let tension exist. Most men are so uncomfortable with emotional tension that they try to fix or smooth everything over too quickly. But women don't fall in love with the man who always rushes to comfort. They fall for the man who can hold space for discomfort without being reactive. That kind of restraint shows strength. It signals that you're not afraid of contrast. You can navigate complexity. And that is rare. Women crave men who can stimulate not just their body or their ego, but their emotional landscape, and that requires range. You can't be one-dimensional. You can't always be the warm guy or always be the mysterious one. You have to be both, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that's authentically human. We're not built to be emotionally flat. So why pretend? Sometimes you're fully present, engaged, attentive, vulnerable. Other times you're distant, not cold, but clearly occupied with your own mission. That's what creates emotional curiosity. She starts asking, where is he? What is he thinking? Why do I miss him when he's not around? You're not pulling away to punish her. You're simply not performing availability. You're rooted in something larger than her attention. That's magnetic. And here's the paradox. The more she has to wonder, the more emotionally invested she becomes. Again, this is not about deception. This is about emotional pacing. If you give her everything up front, there's no room for her to invest. People don't obsess over what's handed to them. They obsess over what they have to reach for. And the beauty is, when that reach is met with genuine moments of closeness, the contrast becomes powerful. It leaves an imprint. Now let me be clear, this emotional back and forth is only effective if it's grounded in honesty. If you're just creating highs and lows to manipulate her nervous system, it's not sustainable. Eventually, she'll feel exploited. But if you're genuinely living a full purpose-driven life, one where you show up powerfully when you're present and disappear respectfully when you're focused elsewhere, that emotional loop creates its own rhythm. One she'll want to sync with. This also requires you to understand pacing in communication. Not every message needs an instant reply. Not every feeling needs to be immediately explained. Give her time to wonder, to feel, to miss. Don't fear the silence. Don't rush to fill every emotional gap. Let her feel the weight of your absence and the richness of your presence. That contrast, that's what turns interest into obsession. But let's go deeper for a moment. Why does this work? Why does the emotional loop captivate us so deeply? Because it mirrors real life. Life isn't always flat or predictable. It has moments of joy and pain, expansion and retreat. When you become a man who reflects that emotional reality, who gives her space to feel multiple dimensions. You feel more real to her, not just safe, not just exciting, but real, and people don't become obsessed with fantasy. They become obsessed with something that feels real but just out of full reach. That's where your power lies, not in being a perfect emotional provider, but in being a man of emotional gravity. You let her feel. You let her miss you, you let her wonder, and most importantly, you never beg for her attention. That psychological space is where obsession is born. Not because you demanded it, but because she chose it. Over and over again. So don't underestimate the power of emotional rhythm. Don't default to comfort or chase constant closeness. Create highs through depth and lows through respectful distance. That loop becomes a story in her mind, a story she rewrites every night before falling asleep, wondering what you'll say next, what you'll do next, and how she can feel that emotional high again. And here's the bottom line. If you really want to understand why some men linger in a woman's heart long after he's gone, why certain men don't just attract women, but haunt them psychologically, then you have to understand this next principle. It's deeper than seduction, more lasting than charm, and it has everything to do with identity. The truth is, people fall hardest not for someone who simply mirrors who they are, but for someone who subtly reflects back who they want to become. It's what I call the deep mirror effect, and it's one of the most potent psychological forces you can activate, because it doesn't just create attraction. It creates emotional dependency, not because you forced it, but because her mind begins to associate you with her own growth, her own evolution, and her best possible self. We all walk around with a hidden version of ourselves, an ideal we're chasing. Even if we don't say it out loud, we carry this internal blueprint of the person we want to be, more confident, more free, more expressive, more disciplined. And when someone enters our life who embodies those traits, not in a performative way, but in a way that's natural and lived, it creates a powerful subconscious bond. She starts to see you not just as a man, but as a mirror. You reflect back to her the woman she wants to be, not through flattery, but through example, and that makes you addictive, because now being near you doesn't just feel good. It feels transformative. It feels like evolution. That's a very different kind of obsession. That's identity, level attraction. But here's the part most men miss. This isn't about telling her who she could be. It's not about trying to change her. That backfires. It's about embodying your own highest standard, your own values, your own discipline, and letting her feel inspired to rise to meet it. You lead by embodiment, not by correction. Think about it. If you're a man who lives with purpose, if you take care of your mind, your body, your goals, and you don't shrink your standards just to make someone else comfortable, she notices, and at first that might even intimidate her. But the longer she stays around that energy, the more magnetic it becomes. Not because you're asking her to change, but because being in your orbit challenges her to grow. That challenge becomes intoxicating. This is also why many women stay attached to men who never tried to impress them, but who simply moved with quiet certainty, men who didn't chase them, but who inspired them, because women remember the man who made them feel something new, something better within themselves. That emotional signature is what sticks, but this effect only works if you're honest with yourself. You cannot fake purpose. You can't pretend to be centered or disciplined if your life is in quiet chaos. Because even if you say all the right things, a woman's intuition will catch the lie. She'll sense the cracks, and when that happens, the mirror breaks, and the obsession fades. So this trick, if we can even call it that, begins with you. You have to become the man you're asking her to be drawn to. You have to develop the traits you want to see mirrored back to you. If you want a woman who is emotionally intelligent, then be emotionally intelligent. If you want her to be inspired, live an inspired life. If you want her to be loyal, disciplined, and secure, then make those non-negotiables in your own behavior. The deep mirror only works when the reflection is real. Now, what makes this even more profound is how subtle it is. You're not preaching, you're not instructing, you're not even trying to lead her. You simply are, and in being, you create the psychological space for her to reflect, to grow, and to rise. That's why it works so powerfully, because it respects her autonomy. You're not forcing transformation, you're inviting it through your own example. And when a woman begins to feel that her best self emerges in your presence, something irreversible happens. She ties her identity to you, not in a codependent way, but in a deeply emotional way. Your voice starts to echo in her decisions. Your energy becomes part of her self-talk. She doesn't just miss you when you're gone. She misses the version of herself that she felt when you were around. And that's what obsession really is. It's not just wanting the other person. It's wanting the version of yourself that you felt with them. That's why this isn't about manipulation. It's about integration. You integrate yourself into her psyche by becoming a silent symbol of elevation, and the more consistent you are, the more undeniable your energy becomes. But here's the catch, you can't do this for her attention. If you're becoming your best self for her, it's already hollow. You have to become him regardless, because that's the only way it becomes real, and the only way it lasts. If she leaves tomorrow, you should still be moving forward. That kind of purpose isn't just attractive, it's unforgettable. So if you're sitting there wondering how to make her obsessed with you, don't start with her. Start with the man in the mirror. Ask yourself, what do I reflect? Who do I become when no one's watching? Am I someone who inspires growth by simply existing in alignment? Because in the end, obsession isn't built through pressure, it's built through presence. And here's the truth that most never understand. Let's talk about silence. Not the awkward kind, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that carries weight. The kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Because there's something most men underestimate, and it's this. Your ability to detach without punishing her emotionally is one of the most psychologically attractive traits you can cultivate. And it's not about being cold, it's about being sovereign. You see, when you pull away from a place of emotional neutrality, not from anger, not from manipulation, but from a grounded sense of self, you activate something incredibly powerful in her psyche. It forces her to reflect. Not because you're trying to teach her a lesson, but because you're reminding her, without ever saying a word, that your world continues, with or without her validation. That kind of detachment doesn't make you heartless. It makes you whole, because here's the truth. Obsession doesn't grow where there's constant availability. It grows in the spaces between, in the pauses where she starts asking, where is he? Why hasn't he reached out? What's he thinking? And more importantly, what did I feel when I was around him that I'm not feeling now? That space gives your presence gravity. You're no longer just another man trying to get her attention. You're the man who's willing to withhold it when necessary, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And when a woman realizes that your emotional world doesn't revolve around her, it creates tension, productive tension, the kind that doesn't push her away, but pulls her in, because now she's not responding to pressure. She's responding to absence, a very different emotional trigger. Now, let's be clear. Detachment is not emotional laziness. It's not shutting down. It's not disappearing to punish or control. It's the art of protecting your emotional energy and refusing to beg for attention that should come willingly. This psychological shift in you forces a shift in her, because when she feels that you're not fighting for closeness, she starts questioning her own behavior. Not because you asked her to, but because your silence now carries meaning. You're telling her, I will not chase, I will not plead, I will not sell myself short for connection. If we align, we align. If not, I will keep moving. And the paradox is that calm refusal to fight for what should be mutual makes her fight for you. You become rare, because here's what you have to understand. Most women are used to being chased. They're used to men overextending, overcommunicating, over-apologizing just to stay in their good graces. When you detach, not with bitterness but with clarity, you interrupt that pattern. You become the one she can't predict. The one who doesn't bend out of shape just to win her approval. That unpredictability doesn't make you unstable. It makes you interesting, and this is where your power lies. Not in how loudly you speak, but in how calmly you withdraw. Because emotional detachment, when done correctly, says something profound. I value connection, but I value myself more. And when a woman senses that you're unattached to outcome, not indifferent, but truly okay with whatever unfolds, she becomes emotionally curious. Her mind starts racing, replaying the last conversation, the last look, the last moment. She starts to wonder, did I miss something? Did I say something wrong? Why do I care so much? This internal questioning is where obsession begins. Not because you planted a seed, but because you stopped watering it, and now she's wondering if she was the one who failed to nurture it. But again, none of this works if it's performative. If you're pulling back just to trigger a response, it won't feel authentic. She'll sense the manipulation, but if your detachment comes from a deeper place, a place of emotional clarity and peace, it becomes irresistible, because you're no longer negotiating for connection. You're embodying it within yourself. That's the shift. So ask yourself, can you sit in silence without needing to be reassured? Can you step back from a woman you deeply desire, not to punish her, but to preserve your dignity? Can you detach not because you don't care, but because you refuse to overinvest in someone who hasn't chosen you fully? That's the real test. Not how well you pursue, but how well you release. Because obsession isn't just about presence. It's about absence. It's about the feeling that something should be there and it's not. That emotional void becomes a mirror, and if you've done the work, if your presence was felt deeply, then your absence becomes deafening. That's what lingers. That's what keeps her up at night, scrolling through old messages, wondering how she lost a man who didn't need her but valued her. A man who showed up with depth, but who also had the strength to walk away in silence when connection wasn't being reciprocated. And that kind of silence, it's louder than any speech you could ever give. So if you're still asking how to make a woman obsessed with you, maybe stop trying to speak to her, and start letting your distance speak for you. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to convince the right woman of your worth. You just have to show her you know it, so deeply, so calmly, that even your absence demands her attention. Let's now shift our focus to something quieter, something often overlooked, but incredibly powerful when it comes to creating not just attraction, but emotional attachment. And it's this: a woman becomes obsessed with the man who makes her feel seen, not just watched. There's a difference. Being watched is about attention. Being seen is about understanding, emotional attunement. And when a man gets that right, it hits a part of her that most never reach. Because at the end of the day, every human being walks through the world with invisible stories, unspoken fears, and quiet longings. Most people are just looking for someone who doesn't skim their surface, but studies the layers. When a man learns to observe, not just behavior, but emotion, subtlety, silence, he taps into a level of intimacy that bypasses logic and enters the subconscious. That's the entry point, not through flashy compliments or clever lines, but through curiosity. Real, grounded, unhurried curiosity. The kind that asks not just, what does she look like? But what does she need? What's behind that smile? What's hiding underneath her confidence? This kind of attention isn't loud. It's quiet, but it's unforgettable, because so few people give it. You see, when a woman feels seen by a man, truly seen, it creates a profound emotional opening. She starts to associate you with safety. And not just physical safety, but psychological safety. That's far more intimate. You become the person she lets her guard down around, not because you demand it, but because you earn it. By consistently showing that you're not just reacting to her words, but listening to her silences. And the interesting thing is, when a woman feels seen, she doesn't just attach to you emotionally, she begins to idealize you. That's the strange power of deep emotional recognition. When someone understands us at levels we barely understand ourselves, we elevate them. We tie our sense of emotional relief to their presence, and that's what creates obsession. But this kind of perception isn't something you fake. You don't learn it from a script, you cultivate it by training your attention. Most men are so focused on what to say next, on how they're being perceived, that they miss what's happening right in front of them. They miss the shift in tone, the subtle withdrawal, the micro expression that revealed more than her words ever did. And let me tell you, when a woman realizes that you saw that shift, that you noticed something she didn't even voice, it changes something in her. You go from being just another man to being a man who gets it. And that understanding breeds desire, not just for your presence, but for your mind. She starts to crave the way you observe her, the way you reflect things back to her that no one else took the time to notice. But again, this isn't about always offering advice or trying to fix things. It's about holding space, being fully present, knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Silence can be more comforting than 100 words if it's filled with presence. And a woman can feel that. Most men rush to fill the space. They try to entertain, impress, or analyze. But the man who makes a woman obsessed isn't the one who always has the answers. He's the one who's not afraid to sit with the unknown, to hold eye contact without needing to fill it, to make her feel safe without needing to be loud about it. That presence becomes a psychological anchor. Now, here's what makes this even more powerful. The woman you're engaging with may have never experienced this kind of attention before. She may be beautiful, successful, confident, and yet still emotionally starved. Because most people around her only notice what she shows. You become unforgettable the moment you notice what she hides. But this doesn't mean you make everything about her. Paradoxically, the more grounded you are in yourself, the more deeply you can attune to someone else. You can't really see another person clearly if you're constantly trying to be seen yourself. So this level of connection requires emotional maturity. It requires stillness. It requires the kind of self-respect that says, I'm not here to impress. I'm here to understand. And when you carry that kind of energy, people lean in, especially women. They lean in not because you're trying to take something from them, but because you're giving them a rare experience, the experience of being seen without being judged, understood without being decoded, appreciated without being objectified. That's where obsession is born, in the feeling she gets around you, not just butterflies, not just excitement, but a deep, calming sense of this man gets me. And once she feels that, she will come back to it over and over again, because it's not something she can easily find somewhere else. And in a world full of shallow validation, that kind of deep recognition becomes sacred. So don't underestimate the power of your attention. Don't underestimate the impact of being a man who listens without trying to fix, who notices the unspoken, and who doesn't need to be loud to be unforgettable. That's where your strength lives, not in your ability to impress her, but in your willingness to witness her. And here's the simple truth, let's talk about timing, not just in terms of when you text back or when you show up, but something much deeper. The timing of emotional availability, because here's the truth most men miss. Women don't become obsessed with the man who is always emotionally open. They become obsessed with the man who understands when to open up and how much to reveal. Emotional exposure, when used wisely, is one of the most powerful tools in building psychological attachment, but it has to be measured, it has to be earned, and it has to be real. You see, emotional vulnerability has become this buzzword in modern dating culture. We tell men, be vulnerable, share your feelings, let her in. And that's not wrong, but it's incomplete, because vulnerability without boundaries isn't intimacy. It's insecurity. A woman doesn't become obsessed with a man who unloads everything on her right away. That doesn't feel special, it feels unstable. What draws her in is the slow reveal, the sense that you're opening the door to your inner world but not throwing it wide open. She starts to feel that what you're sharing isn't just for anyone, it's for her. It's intentional, selective, earned, and this taps into something primal. When a man who is emotionally composed, strong, and centered chooses to let a woman see him, even just a glimpse, It creates a rush of meaning. She doesn't just hear your story. She feels chosen, trusted, special, and that feeling creates emotional glue. But again, it only works when the timing is right. If you open up too soon, before she's even invested, it doesn't hit. If you never open up at all, it creates distance. But if you pace your vulnerability, if you share at just the right moment, when she's already leaning in, when her emotional guard is already lowering, that's when it becomes unforgettable. It's also about how you share. Emotional depth doesn't mean turning every conversation into a therapy session. It means expressing your truth with clarity, not chaos, saying, "Here's something that shaped me," rather than, "Here's everything broken inside me." Because here's the truth. Emotional weight only draws her in when you've shown her that you can carry it yourself. When a man can speak about his past pain without drowning in it, about his fears without being consumed by them, and about his dreams without needing external validation, that's emotional mastery, and women recognize that. They feel it, it builds respect, admiration, and connection, and what makes this even more potent is contrast. If you're already displaying strength, self-control, and purpose in your daily actions, your moments of emotional openness become powerful contrasts. That's what sticks in her memory, the fact that the man who seemed so composed in the world, so focused, so untouchable in some ways, opened a private window just for her. That's what creates the loop in her mind. She starts wondering what else you haven't shared yet, what layers are still hidden. It activates her imagination, and when a woman's imagination is engaged, when she's thinking about who you are underneath, you're not just in her life. You're in her mind, but let's also not forget this. A woman isn't just attracted to your story. She's attracted to your relationship with your story. Do you carry it with bitterness or with clarity? Do you speak from wounds or from wisdom? That difference determines whether your vulnerability connects or repels. Because when you're still bleeding from the past, your story becomes a warning. But when you've integrated your past, when you've reflected, healed, and owned it, it becomes a key to intimacy, a bridge between your world and hers. Now, none of this means you should be calculating or rehearsed. In fact, the opposite is true. The most powerful moments are spontaneous. A quiet sentence when she least expects it. A look in your eye when she realizes you've been through things you don't speak of lightly. A small confession, casually shared, that tells her more about you than 100 hours of conversation. But again, it works because it's rare. Because you're not constantly expressing. Because you're not seeking validation. You share because you choose to. Because in that moment you trust her, and that trust, that is what bonds her to you. It's also worth saying this. Don't make the mistake of only showing vulnerability in weakness. Show it in strength, share your wins. Let her see your ambition, your drive, your vision, not just your struggles. A woman becomes obsessed not just with your pain, but with your possibility. And when you include her in both, when she feels part of your emotional depth and your emotional ascent, she ties her identity to yours. That's when attachment becomes obsession. So ask yourself, are you emotionally available or emotionally exposed? Do you pace your depth, or do you hand it over all at once? Do you make her earn your truth, or do you give it away hoping it'll make her stay? Because when you master the art of selective vulnerability, you give her something no one else can, a window into a strong man's soul. And that's not just attractive, it's irresistible, so remember this.